Everything finally belongs to us now, Isabel said as she raised her crystal wine glass beneath the glow of the chandelier. The room fell quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that settles over a family when someone says out loud what everyone has been thinking. I sat at the far end of the long oak table inside the old dining room that had witnessed 3 generations of victories, failures, promises, and betrayals. Nobody looked at me. Nobody asked what I thought. That was the first mistake they made. The House of Harrison had stood on that hill overlooking the river for nearly a century. The walls were lined with oil paintings, the fireplace crackled softly, and the silver serving trays reflected the warm light from above. Yet despite the beauty around us, something cold lingered in the room. David loosened his tie and stared down at his plate. He looked exhausted, like a man carrying a burden he no longer understood. Across from him, Isabel appeared calm and elegant, dressed in the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. Ethan stood near the staircase, pretending to check messages on his phone, but his eyes moved carefully from one face to another. He was watching. He always watched. Eleanor sat quietly beneath the chandelier, her hands folded in her lap. She avoided eye contact with everyone at the table. James entered carrying another bottle of wine and placed it beside Isabel without saying a word. The old butler had served this family longer than most people in that room had been alive. If walls could speak, James would have been their voice. "We should start discussing the future," Isabel continued. "There are important decisions to make." Her words sounded reasonable, sensible, almost caring, but underneath them was something else. Ownership, control, the belief that the story was already finished. I reached for my water glass and took a slow sip. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. For years, I had allowed them to think I was nothing more than an aging outsider sitting quietly at the edge of the family portrait. They saw the gray hair, the worn denim jacket, the tired face. They saw exactly what I wanted them to see. Ethan glanced toward me. For a brief second, our eyes met. Unlike the others, he looked uncertain, curious, as though he sensed a missing piece nobody else could see. Isabel smiled and lifted her glass higher. "To new beginnings," she said. Everyone joined the toast except me. I simply sat there and listened to the sound of crystal touching crystal. 72 hours earlier, a phone call had changed everything. 72 hours earlier, I was sitting alone on the back porch of the guest house watching the late afternoon sun settle across the hills beyond the estate. The main house stood several hundred feet away, grand and imposing against the fading sky. From a distance it looked peaceful, almost timeless. Up close, it felt different. Every hallway carried whispers. Every closed door seemed to hide a conversation that stopped the moment someone entered the room. I had lived around that family long enough to recognize the difference. My coffee had gone cold when my phone rang. Hardly anyone called me anymore. Most people preferred to assume I was no longer involved in matters that concerned the future of the estate. The screen displayed a name I had not expected to see. Thomas. I stared at it for a moment before answering. His voice sounded measured, but there was tension beneath it. He asked if we could meet privately the following morning. Not at the house, not at his office, somewhere neutral. That alone told me the conversation would matter. Thomas was not a man who enjoyed drama. He had spent decades managing family disputes with calm precision. If he was being cautious, there was a reason. After the call ended, I remained seated for a long time. The wind moved gently through the trees. Somewhere near the main driveway, I heard the distant sound of a car arriving. A few minutes later, James appeared carrying a sealed envelope. He approached without speaking and handed it to me. His expression revealed nothing, yet I could tell he was uneasy. "This came earlier today," he said quietly. "Mr. Thomas asked that only you receive it." I turned the envelope over in my hands. No markings, no return address, just my name written in neat black ink. James lingered for a moment before looking toward the main house. Lights were beginning to appear in the upstairs windows. "People become very confident when they think nobody is paying attention," he said before walking away. I waited until I was alone before opening the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At first glance it looked ordinary. Then I noticed a reference number I recognized from years ago. A document I had not seen in nearly 2 decades. A document that should not have existed anymore. My eyes moved slowly across the page. With every line, another piece of the puzzle shifted into place. By the time I reached the bottom, I finally understood why Thomas wanted to meet in secret. Someone inside that family had been hiding far more than money. The next morning, I left the estate before sunrise. A thin layer of fog rested over the grounds as I drove toward the small town 20 miles away. Thomas had chosen a quiet cafe near the courthouse, a place where nobody from the family was likely to appear. When I arrived, he was already seated in the corner with a leather folder resting beside his coffee cup. He looked older than I remembered, not weaker, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying someone else's secrets for too many years. He waited until the waitress left before speaking. "I am going to ask you a question," he said, "and I need an honest answer." I nodded. Thomas studied me carefully. "Have you ever wondered why certain records disappeared after William Harrison passed away?" The name hung between us. William Harrison, the man whose decisions still shaped every corner of the estate decades after his death. I looked out the window for a moment. Of course I had wondered. Entire files had vanished. Ownership structures had changed. Trust documents had been amended. Yet every explanation had always sounded reasonable at the time. Thomas slowly opened the folder. Inside were copies of documents, correspondence, and legal filings stretching back nearly 20 years. Some I recognized immediately. Others I had never seen before. Certain people benefited from confusion, he said quietly. And confusion became easier to maintain than the truth. I turned another page, then another. Patterns began to emerge. Small inconsistencies that meant nothing on their own suddenly connected like pieces of a map. Transfers approved without discussion. Decisions made without proper authorization. Information shared selectively, depending on who was asking questions. The most surprising part was not what had happened. It was how long it had been happening. "Does Eleanor know?" I asked. Thomas hesitated before answering. "She knows part of it." That response told me more than a direct answer ever could. Eleanor had been protecting something, or someone, for years. My eyes settled on one final document near the bottom of the stack. Unlike the others, it contained a signature I recognized instantly. The date beneath it stopped me cold. It had been executed only 6 months earlier, long after everyone believed the matter was settled. Thomas noticed my reaction. "Now you understand why I asked to meet privately," he said. I nodded slowly. Outside, morning traffic moved through town as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Because for the first time, I knew somebody inside the family had been rewriting the rules while everyone else was busy arguing over the game. I drove back to the estate just before noon. The gates opened slowly, revealing the long driveway lined with oak trees that had stood there longer than most of the people now fighting over the family's future. As the house came into view, I found myself thinking about how differently it had looked 20 years earlier. Back then, family dinners had been loud. Children ran through the halls. People disagreed, certainly, but there had been warmth underneath the arguments. Somewhere along the way, that warmth disappeared. Looking back, I could see the changes more clearly than ever. Isabel had not transformed the family overnight. She had done it gradually, one conversation at a time, one small decision at a time, one carefully planted doubt after another. She rarely raised her voice. She did not need to. Her influence worked best in quiet moments. A suggestion here, a concern there, an observation delivered with perfect timing. By the time anyone noticed the pattern, the damage had already been done. David had changed the most. I remembered when he used to walk the property with his father, asking questions about every building, every acre, every story connected to the land. He had once cared about preserving the family's legacy. Now he spent most of his days putting out fires he did not understand. Every decision seemed to exhaust him. Every conversation left him more uncertain than before. Then there was Eleanor. For years I assumed her silence meant agreement. The documents Thomas showed me forced me to reconsider that assumption. Silence could mean many things. Fear, loyalty, regret, protection. Perhaps Eleanor had spent years carrying knowledge she believed would destroy the family if it ever surfaced. Perhaps she had convinced herself that keeping quiet was the same thing as keeping peace. As I entered the house, I noticed Ethan sitting alone in the library. Books and folders covered the table in front of him. He looked up briefly before closing one of the files. Most people would have dismissed him as a curious young man with too much time on his hands. That would have been another mistake. Ethan possessed the one quality nobody else seemed to value anymore. He paid attention. "Have you ever noticed how nobody tells the same story twice around here?" he asked quietly. I stopped. "What makes you say that?" He leaned back in his chair. Because every time I ask about the past, the answers change. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked toward the dining room where the next family gathering would soon take place. I think somebody has been hiding the truth for a very long time, he said. The unsettling part was that I was beginning to realize he was right. That evening, Ethan knocked on the door of the guest house, carrying a cardboard archive box tucked beneath his arm. He looked frustrated and more determined than I had ever seen him. Without saying much, he placed the box on the kitchen table and began pulling out folders. Most were old accounting records, property surveys, and trust reports dating back years. At first glance, they appeared ordinary. Then he showed me what he had found. The same property appeared under different ownership structures depending on which year he examined. Signatures appeared where they should not have. Entire pages were referenced, but missing from the files. None of it proved wrongdoing by itself. Together, however, the inconsistencies formed a pattern that could not be ignored. I started with one question, Ethan said. I wanted to know why nobody could explain who approved the changes to the Southern Land holdings. He slid another document across the table. Then every answer led to 3 more questions. I studied the paperwork carefully. The names changed. The entities changed. The explanations changed. Yet one detail remained remarkably consistent. The same small circle of people always seemed to benefit from the confusion. Ethan sat back and rubbed his eyes. I thought I was imagining things at first. I understood exactly what he meant. Families like ours survived on assumptions. People accepted stories because challenging them felt uncomfortable. Over time, those stories hardened into facts whether they were true or not. The following afternoon, Ethan met Sophia at a small office downtown. She was a young attorney Thomas trusted, and unlike many people connected to the estate, she had no personal history clouding her judgment. After reviewing several documents, she noticed something that nobody else had mentioned. Certain amendments referenced supporting records that no longer existed in the official archive. Legally, that was unusual. Practically, it was even more unusual because somebody had gone to considerable effort to make those records disappear without drawing attention. Later that night, James quietly joined us in the library. He closed the door behind him and stood near the fireplace for several seconds before speaking. "You are looking in the right place," he said. Neither Ethan nor I interrupted. James rarely offered opinions. When he did, people listened. "Most people assume secrets are hidden inside locked safes," he continued. "The truth is they are usually hidden inside ordinary paperwork nobody bothers to read." Then he glanced toward the ceiling as if listening to distant footsteps from another part of the house. The person who started all this never expected someone from the younger generation to ask questions. Ethan exchanged a look with me. For the first time, it felt like we were getting close to something important. Not money, not property, the truth. The following morning began with an unusual tension hanging over the estate. Nobody spoke about it directly, yet everyone seemed aware that something was shifting beneath the surface. During breakfast, Isabel appeared more confident than ever. She moved through the dining room as though every outcome had already been decided. David barely touched his food. Eleanor remained quiet, staring out the window toward the gardens. From a distance, it looked like an ordinary family gathering. Up close, it felt like people waiting for a storm they could not yet see. Later that day, Ethan and I met Sophia again. She had spent the night reviewing additional records Thomas provided. When she arrived, she placed 3 folders on the table and opened them one by one. The documents revealed something none of us expected. Several of the estate's most valuable assets were not owned by David. They were not owned by Isabel. They were not controlled by any entity currently listed in the family's public records. For years, everyone had been arguing over authority they did not actually possess. Sophia pointed to a series of trust structures created decades earlier. Most had been overlooked because they appeared inactive. In reality, they had simply been ignored. The legal ownership trail led somewhere entirely different. Ethan leaned forward, studying every page. "If these records are accurate," he said slowly, "then almost everything people believe about the estate is wrong." Sophia nodded. "Not almost. Everything." The room fell silent. I remembered the confidence in Isabel's voice at family dinners. The certainty, the assumptions. Suddenly those memories looked different. She had been playing a game without ever seeing the entire board. That evening, I walked through the main house alone. Portraits of past generations lined the hallways. Men and women who had built fortunes, protected secrets, and left instructions for descendants they would never meet. As I passed the library, I noticed James organizing old ledgers. Without looking up, he spoke quietly. People tend to mistake visibility for power. I stopped. What do you mean? He closed one of the books carefully. The person giving orders is not always the person making decisions. Then he returned to his work as though the conversation had ended. Later that night, I sat alone reviewing the documents once more. One detail continued to stand out. The true authority behind the estate had appeared repeatedly throughout the records, hidden in plain sight, present at every gathering, mentioned often, understood by almost nobody. And for the first time, I realized the final revelation was closer than any of us imagined. The family gathering was scheduled for Saturday evening in the library overlooking the Western Gardens. By the time I arrived, everyone was already there. The atmosphere felt strangely formal, as though an invisible line had been drawn through the room and nobody knew which side they belonged on. Thomas stood near the fireplace with several folders arranged neatly on a table beside him. Isabel appeared completely at ease. She greeted guests with practiced warmth and spoke confidently about future plans for the estate. David remained close to her, though his expression revealed the exhaustion that had become impossible to hide. Ethan sat quietly near the back of the room, observing everything. Sophia occupied a chair along the wall, saying little. Eleanor had chosen a seat beside one of the tall windows. She stared into the darkening garden outside, as if searching for answers among the shadows. James moved silently through the room, serving coffee before taking his usual place near the doorway. Once everyone settled, Thomas cleared his throat. Conversation stopped immediately. For the next hour, he reviewed legal structures, trust arrangements, and historical records connected to the family's holdings. Much of it sounded technical, yet every detail seemed to chip away at assumptions people had accepted for years. Isabel remained composed. Whenever a surprising fact emerged, she simply smiled as though none of it truly mattered. She still believed the final outcome favored her. That confidence never wavered. As the presentation continued, however, subtle changes began to appear. David asked more questions. Ethan exchanged occasional glances with Sophia. Even Victoria seemed less certain than before. The deeper Thomas went into the records, the harder it became to maintain old narratives. Eventually, he reached the final folder. The room grew noticeably quieter. Everyone understood this was the reason they had been called together. Thomas placed both hands on the table before speaking. "There is one last matter that must be addressed," he said calmly. "A matter connected to instructions that remained sealed until specific conditions were met." Isabel straightened slightly in her chair. For the first time all evening, genuine curiosity crossed her face. Thomas opened the folder and removed a large envelope bearing an old family seal. I recognized it immediately. So did Eleanor. Her eyes widened ever so slightly before she looked down at her hands. Nobody else seemed to notice. Thomas examined the seal carefully. Then he looked around the room one final time. "Everything discussed tonight has been preparation," he said. "What comes next determines who actually holds authority over the estate." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Then Thomas broke the seal and reached inside. Thomas removed several pages from the envelope and adjusted his glasses before reading. Nobody moved. The only sound came from the grandfather clock in the hallway, marking each passing second. These instructions were prepared by William Harrison and reaffirmed through subsequent legal instruments over the years. Thomas began. Isabel folded her hands calmly, still expecting confirmation of everything she believed. David sat forward slightly. Ethan remained perfectly still. I watched each face around the room and realized that every person present was about to learn a different lesson. Thomas continued reading. The estate, the trusts, the voting authority, and the long-term governance structure had never been designed to pass automatically to a single heir. That assumption alone had fueled years of conflict. Instead, William created a layered system intended to prevent any one person from gaining unchecked control. Several people exchanged confused glances. Then Thomas reached the section that mattered most. "The final authority concerning major decisions shall remain vested in the designated family steward," he read. Isabel immediately interrupted. "And who is that?" Her voice remained polite, but the confidence behind it had begun to crack. Thomas looked down at the document. The steward may delegate responsibilities, but the authority itself remains intact unless voluntarily surrendered. The room seemed to shrink around us. Eleanor lowered her eyes. Ethan looked from Thomas to me and back again. Somewhere deep inside, he had already figured it out. Thomas finally spoke the name. Silence followed. Not surprise. Something deeper. The kind of silence that arrives when a story people have repeated for years suddenly collapses. The authority had never belonged to David. It had never belonged to Isabel. It had never belonged to any of the people competing for influence around the dinner table. The steward was Eleanor. Every major decision required her approval. Every transfer depended on her consent. Every safeguard in the trust structure ultimately pointed back to her. Isabel stared at her in disbelief. David looked equally stunned. Eleanor remained seated exactly as she had been all evening. Quiet, unassuming, almost invisible. For years, people had mistaken her silence for weakness. They had mistaken her kindness for irrelevance. They had mistaken her restraint for surrender. Thomas continued reading. The documents also revealed that Eleanor possessed the power to appoint a successor when she determined the time was right. Not the wealthiest person, not the loudest person, not the most ambitious person. The individual who demonstrated judgment, integrity, and commitment to the family's future. For the first time that evening, Isabel had nothing to say. Nobody did, because the person they had overlooked for years had been sitting in plain sight the entire time. For several moments, nobody spoke. The weight of the revelation settled across the room like a winter fog. Isabel looked toward Eleanor as though expecting her to deny everything, to laugh, to explain that there had been some misunderstanding. But Eleanor simply sat quietly in her chair with her hands folded in her lap, the same way she had sat through countless family dinners, arguments, celebrations, and disappointments. David leaned back slowly and rubbed his forehead. Years of assumptions were unraveling in front of him. He had spent so much time trying to carry responsibilities he never truly possessed that he had forgotten to ask who had entrusted them to him in the first place. Thomas carefully organized the documents before speaking again. Authority was never intended to be a reward, he said. It was intended to be a responsibility. Nobody challenged him. Nobody could. The records spoke for themselves. Ethan was the first person to look directly at Eleanor. There was no anger in his expression, no frustration. Only understanding. He finally saw what the rest of the family had missed for years. Eleanor had not remained silent because she was powerless. She had remained silent because she understood the difference between influence and attention. Some people needed to be heard. Others simply needed to be right when it mattered. Eleanor slowly stood. Every eye in the room followed her. "I never wanted control," she said softly. "I wanted stability." Her voice was calm, yet every word carried weight. Your grandfather understood that families do not fall apart because of money. They fall apart because people begin believing they deserve more than one another. The room remained still. Even Isabel lowered her eyes. For the first time, certainty had abandoned her. Eleanor then turned toward Ethan. "For months, you asked questions nobody else wanted to ask," she said. "You looked for facts instead of advantages. That matters." Ethan seemed genuinely surprised. He had not been searching for recognition. He had simply wanted the truth. Eleanor smiled faintly. "The future of this family will belong to people who protect it, not people who possess it." Outside, the first lights of evening appeared across the grounds. The old estate looked exactly the same as it had the day before. Yet everything had changed. As conversation slowly resumed, I stepped away from the group and walked toward the hallway. Nobody stopped me. Nobody needed to. Behind me, a family was finally beginning to understand itself. Ahead of me stretched a quiet corridor lined with portraits of people who had learned the same lesson long ago. Power was never the prize. Character was. And in the end, the people who fought hardest for control were not the ones who earned it.